Hey all, and welcome to another Programming the Net tutorial. In this video, we're going to learn how to build a JavaScript image carousel. And I haven't really built one before, so I'm kind of going to be freestyling through this video, just like follow along with the coding, and we'll see where this goes. In terms of what I have in mind for what we should be building, it's something like this, right? Like we have a bunch of slides and controls for moving left and moving right in the through the slides, and then each one of the controls makes the current slide go away and the next one come in, and then we can navigate backwards as well, and then the whole thing is looping. And we're going to be building pretty much this with pure JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. And instead of just having text that says third slide, we're going to use a few images that I have over here. The images are also at different sizes, so we should make sure that our carousel plays nicely with different sized images. Alright, so let's get started. And I think the order that we're going to do things in is first build kind of the HTML structure and scaffolding for how our carousel should function. Then we're going to style things with CSS and kind of build like something that looks like the final product but doesn't have the user interaction quite yet, and then we can adjust the CSS classes and kind of like manually make the carousel shift. Once all of that is working, we can move on to JavaScript and like actually implement the automated interactions that need to happen when the user is clicking on the previous or next buttons. I have here an empty glitch project as usual. I've kept the style and the JavaScript inclusion inside of HTML, and then I have an empty script and an empty style file. So really starting from scratch. And we are going to start by creating a container for the entire thing. So I'm going to create a div, give it a class, and this is going to be hosting everything. So there are sort of three components to the carousel. If we look over here, right, like there's the container for the images where the images live, and then there's the left navigation button and the right navigation button, and that's how we're going to structure ours as well. So we're going to say div class equals images container, and then div class equals left arrow, and div class equals right arrow. Alright, and then we're going to have our images themselves inside of the images container div. Before we do that though, let's give our container kind of a background color and some dimensions in order to be able to start seeing on the page exactly what we are doing. So I'm going to go inside of our style.css and start writing some styling for the carousel container. I'm gonna make it almost full width, so I'm just going to say width, let's say 80 viewport width, and height, I'm going to give it a height in pixels. I'm going to make it, let's say, 600 pixels wide, and we'll see later if we end up wanting to change these dimensions. Let's give it a background color as well so we see what we're working with. I'll make it a dark gray. Alright, and yeah, carousel container is not showing up, which is interesting. Alright, let's inspect the element and see why that is. Ah, there we go. I forgot a digit in the color. Alright, great. And we also want to, let's say, center it on the page. So I'm just going to say margin auto. And that should center it inside of the body. Okay, great. So this is our container, and then we have our container for the images, which should probably take up pretty much the entire space. And then we should have a left arrow kind of like on top of the image on the left side, and the right arrow on top of the image on the right side. So let's style our images container, and I'm just gonna say width 100%, right? So that's gonna be 100% of the parent. Same for the height, 100% of the parent. And then let's give it a background color as well, and I'm going to make it like a transparent red, just so we can see the overlay on top of our previous thing. And now let's do our buttons. For the left arrow and right arrow, we're actually going to create two very simple arrows from CSS. This is a trick that I really love with CSS, and we're going to go like this. Left arrow. First of all, we know where we want this to be, right? Like we want it to be absolutely positioned within its container, kind of in the center vertically, and on the left side horizontally. So I'm gonna say position absolute, which also means that I should make its container have position relative. And we can say top 50%. We can say left maybe like 25 pixels or so. And let's give it a width and a height. Let's make it a square to get the positioning right, and then we're gonna turn that square into an arrow. So width, let's say 20, height 20. Let's give it a background color of blue, just to see where it is. All right, great. So we have the placement of our first arrow. We see it's a little bit under the center, which is because its top edge is aligned with the center. So we need to do the transform trick. So we'll say transform, right? And we have to do translate on the y-axis by half of its size. So translate y by -50%. Right, so now it's in the very center vertically. Let's bring it actually maybe a little bit. No, it's fine. We don't need to bring it closer to the edge. And now we should actually turn it into an arrow. And the easiest way to turn a div into an arrow is to give it two borders for adjacent sides of the square, right? So if you gave it a border left and the border bottom, and then rotated it by 45 degrees, it would look exactly like an arrow pointing to the left. So let's do that. We can say border left 1 pixel. Let's make it thicker. Let's make it 3 pixels solid black. Let's do border bottom 3 pixels solid black. Okay, let's remove the background color because now we can see our arrow anyway. And now we need to rotate it by 45 degrees, right? So this is another transform that we need to add on top of the translation. So I'll just say rotate 45 degrees, and we'll see if it's in the right direction. Yeah, okay, that looks like an arrow. Maybe let's make it a little bit smaller than 20. Let's make it 15. It's kind of big right now. Yeah, that looks good to me. And then the other thing we should do is have the cursor be a pointer when the user is hovering on top of that. So we can say cursor pointer. All right, cool. And then if we want it to be fancy, we could give some feedback on hover, right? So we could say something like left arrow hover, and like maybe decrease its opacity to 0.5, and that means we should also make its opacity 1 inside the original declaration, right? So when the user hovers, we see it becoming a little bit more dim. And if we want it to be even fancier, we could animate this opacity and make it transition as opposed to just jumping from 1 to 0.5. And in order to do that, we would say transition opacity 0.5 seconds, and we can do a linear transition, right? And then, maybe it's not 0.5 seconds. You need to specify an S after the number for the seconds, right? So right now it's like a smooth, maybe it's hard to notice on this background, but it's a smooth transition over half a second from its current state back into full opacity. Great. Let's actually make the background color of the whole container a little bit lighter because it's kind of hard to see the arrows right now. So I'm gonna make it maybe a light gray. All right, cool. Right, like light gray with a transparent red overlaid on top. So we have our left arrow. It doesn't do anything yet, but it looks beautiful. So let's do the same thing for our right arrow. And I'm just going to copy the style from here and rename left to right. And we need to, of course, adjust the placement. Instead of being 25 pixels from the left, it's going to be 25 pixels from the right. And it also needs to have the different rotation, right? Like instead of 45 degrees, we could give it minus 45 degrees. No, never mind. 45 plus 180, 45 plus 180, 225. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now we have, it's starting to look like a carousel, right? We have our two arrows, both look like they can be clicked. Obviously, they don't do anything quite yet, but we are slowly getting there. All right, so now let's get into bringing some static for now images inside of our container. So I'm going to start with one. We're going to make sure it fits properly within the container, and then I'm going to bring more, and we're going to start creating the logic for how the carousel should be working. So I'm going to say image source equals, and as I was showing earlier, I have a few images saved here. Feel free to use your own, whatever images work. Image source equals home, and that's a long source, and that's okay. Okay, and let's give it a class. For now, we're just going to say carousel image, and we're going to add more classes later as we develop this. Great, so let's create some styling for that. Maybe I'll split this up and write some comments. Carousel navigation. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. So carousel image. First, we see that the size is like completely out of proportion, so we should make sure it fits within our container. So we can say width 100%, height 100%. This is, I think this is distorting the image. Yes, that distorts the image. So we should also make sure to have width 100%, height auto, and then one thing we could do in order to center the image inside of the container is to make the container have a display flex, right? And then center the image within that. So we can say images container display flex. The direction doesn't really matter. Oh, I see. Display flex might actually stretch the image to fill the entire size of the container, which is totally not what we want. Okay, in that case, maybe we can try figuring out a way to do it without display flex. We could say something like top 50%. Right, give it a position absolute, give its parent a position relative, right, have top 50%, and then add a transform of translating it up, just like we did with the navigation. Transform translate y for minus 50%. Great, so we have our first image of the carousel in there. Nothing happens quite yet. All right, cool. Let's add a few more images and figure out how we can deal with having multiple images within the same carousel. All right, so this is our first image. Maybe I'm going to make the code a little bit wider. Let's bring a second image, same class, source, and I'm gonna use another one of these. Okay, so we see our first image is not showing up anymore, and that's because we are using position absolute, right? So our first image is actually underneath the second one that we just inserted, right? Like we see it here. If we were to delete the second image from the structure, we would see the first one showing up underneath. Let's also add the third one, and if the third one has a lower height than the second one, we would be able to see the second one under. So for that, I'm gonna go back to the HTML and say image class equals carousel image, source equals, this is also tall. Yeah, maybe let's use this one because this one is a little bit wider. Boom. Right, so now we see all of our images are stacked on top of each other. However, what we want to do is to make them kind of move from left to right, as we've seen in the initial example. The way we can do that is by adding a class that's called the active class, right? So we're kind of keeping track of which image is currently being displayed with a class, and we're just going to say active for the first one. And what we want is for the active image to be visible and also within the viewport, and for the inactive images to be invisible, right? So we can say active opacity 1, carousel image.active. This is how you can, I don't think we've done this before, this is how you can use multiple CSS classes in the same declaration. So .carousel image.active means any div that has both of these classes attached to it, right? So if we make the regular carousel image transparent and just have the active one show up, then we will only see one image at a time, right? So if we were to move the active class from the first one to the second one, we would see the second image, right? If we were to move the active class from the second one to the third one, we would only see the third image, right? And like this, moving the active class from the current one to the next one to the next one is what we're going to do in JavaScript once we finish building up this whole structure. Okay, so that's one thing. We also need to keep track of which image is the previous one and which image is the next one, right? Like we want to animate things kind of like in this example, right, where an image slides in and moves the current one away from its position. In order to do that, we're going to use the CSS transforms to kind of change the position of the images. However, if we want the next image to slide in over the current one, it needs to be visible, right? So the previous image, the current image, and the next image are always going to be visible. Everything else is going to be invisible. So let's start by adding that. So if the third image is active, that means the second image is the previous. And I'm going to rename this to previous image, active image, and next image. Right, so if the third one is active, that means when you click on the next arrow, the first one should be the next, and when you click on the previous arrow, the second one should show up. Okay, so let's change this active image, and then let's do previous image and also next image. Okay, so now we're kind of back to ground zero where all three images are showing up. However, we want the next image to be kind of like after the right edge of our container, right? And the previous image to be before the left edge of the container, so we can do the transitions as we were mentioning. So we could use CSS transforms in order to do that. And one way to do it would be like this. For active, we don't need any additional transforms. What we have is perfect. For the previous image, we of course want to preserve the translate y minus 50%, and we also want to do a translate x of minus 100%. Right, so this moves it outside of our container. However, it's currently visible, but that's okay. Let's move the next one, the next image to the right of the container, and then we're gonna deal with the visibility issue. So for the next image, we want translate of plus, like 100%, plus 100%, right? So we have previous image, current image, next image, and whenever we click on the button, we will have them transition in between their current positions. Let's also add like maybe one or two more images to make sure that they don't show up because they're not supposed to show up. So I'll just say image plus equals carousel image, source equals, and let's see which one, this one. Okay, so now that we've added an extra image, the next image will be the newly added one, not the first one, right? It's just like the sequence of things. Right, and then the other image should be invisible. And let's maybe also add the fifth one just to have things complete. Image class equals carousel image. This one is neither the previous one nor the next one. Source equals, and I'm pasting the link. Close the tag. All right, great. So now we have the 5 images brought into our carousel. And yeah, we have to make sure those edges of the previous and next images are hidden. And the way we can do that, I think, I might have to do some Googling for this, but we can try something first. We can use the overflow property on the images container and give it the hidden attribute. Right, so overflow, the CSS overflow property allows you to specify what happens when you have elements within a parent container that are actually outside of the bounds of this container, right? So in our case, the previous image was like outside of the pink container that we see, and the next one was outside of the pink container that we see as well. By specifying overflow hidden, HTML is going to hide everything that's outside of the images container that's declared inside of images container. Great. So now the moment I think this is going to be a little bit hard for us to like prototype by changing HTML, but we can take a look. The moment we shift this stuff, the moment the 4th image becomes active, the 5th one becomes next, and the 3rd one becomes previous, our whole carousel is going to move. It's not going to animate quite yet because we didn't tell CSS to transition the transform, but we will do that. So let's kind of move our carousel by hand, right? So the last image becomes next. The 4th image becomes active. And the 3rd image becomes, oops, mistake. The 3rd image becomes previous, right? We can't see the previous one and the next one because we just hid them. We can unhide them for a second just to make sure they are what they need to be. And like it looks good, right? Like the abstract painting was on top before, and the other image was not in the hierarchy quite yet. Maybe let's keep them visible for now, just to make sure that our code is working. So I think we're good with HTML and CSS for now, and we can actually start moving into JavaScript and building the functionality for our carousel arrows. Great. So in order to do that, I'm going to start by our usual event handler for when the web page has loaded. So I'll say window, add event listener, DOM content loaded, and then let's create a function and place everything in here. So we have to listen for two click events, right? When the user clicks on the right arrow or when the user clicks on the left arrow. In order to do that, we should give our buttons IDs, right? So div class equals left arrow, ID equals button previous, let's say carousel button previous, and then ID equals carousel button next. Let's get these elements inside of JavaScript and add the event listener. So let's say var previous button equals document get element by ID carousel button previous. Excuse me. See, I'm getting good at this. I didn't have to go back in the HTML and look at the ID that we just specified. I'm so proud. Next button document get element by ID carousel button next. Oh, but was it button next or next button? Button next. Okay, great. I spoke too soon. All right, cool. So let's add the event listeners as well. So we can say previous button, the click event listeners, I meant. Add event listener, click, and then on previous button, click. And then do the same thing for the next button. Add event listener, click on next button, click. We will start by implementing the next functionality. We'll make it work as it's supposed to. And once we have that working, we'll move on to the previous. So I'll declare both functions, but leave the previous one empty for now, right? So we'll say function on previous button, click, and we'll leave it empty, and then we'll work within function on next button, click. All right, cool. So what do we need to do here? We said that the user pressing on the next button means the following. It means that we need to figure out who has the previous image class, who has the active image class, and who has the next image class, and kind of move them all down by one position. And in order to detect that, we could do a few things. I think what we're going to do is that we're going to get all of the images, or all of the elements that have the carousel image class. This is something that we haven't done before. Everything that we've done before in JavaScript involved getting an element by its ID. You can also get elements by their class names, right? And that usually returns more than one element, right? Because multiple elements can have the same class name. So we're gonna get all of these images by their class name, check which one is the active one, kind of keep that index, and we'll know that the previous index is going to be the previous one and the next index is the next one, and kind of shift things around a little bit. So let's go inside of our JavaScript, and to get all images, we can say document get elements, right? Like notice the S is plural, by class name, and the class name is carousel image. Let's print this to the console to see exactly what's going on. All right, cool. So I'm going to open up my console. I'm keeping it at the docked at the bottom of the screen. If you want to, if you have it at the on the right side and want to move it to the bottom, you can go to the three dots and say dock to right or dock to bottom or left or separate window. Um, cool. So when I click on the next button, we should be getting our things, right? So we see this thing that says HTML collection, and when we open it, we see a list of all of our divs, or sorry, all of our images that have the class carousel image attached to them. Cool. So in order to go over all of them, we can do a for loop, and we can say var index equals 0, index lower than all images dot length, index plus plus. This HTML collection is very similar to a JavaScript array. It's not quite a JavaScript array. It's like a different, a little bit more complex kind of object. But for the most part, you can interact with it like you would with an array, right? So it has the length property, which we also see here, which tells us how many elements the get elements by class name returned, and then we can like kind of address them individually, right? So we say var current image is all images of index, and let's print all of the elements from inside of the for loop, right? So let's do console log current image, and let's also add a string and say image number, and then index, and then colon, and then current image. All right, so let's clear out the console. Right here, I'm just printing multiple things to the console, right? Like I'm printing the image number string, and then the index that we're working it, and then the colon, and then the actual HTML element. So when I click on the button, we see, right, image number 0 is the first one, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. So it's kind of what we are expecting. Great. So going back to the high level, what we need to do now is find the index for the active image, right? Like that's kind of what's grounding us. That's kind of what's centering us. We know that that index -1 is going to be the previous image. That index +1 is going to be the next image, with a small edge case when we are at the very end of the carousel, which we're going to deal with. And we want to shift everything by 1 after that, right? So we're going to create a variable that will hold the current image index, right? So we'll say var current current active image index equals 0. And we need to detect for each one of these images if it's the current one or not. In order to do that, we can look at the class and see if the class includes active image, right? Like if the class string includes the active image string. In order to get the class, I think we can do current image var current image. I'm just going to call this image instead of current image so we don't get confused with the active image index. And I'm going to call, yeah, no, we can keep that current active image index. Image class equals image get attribute for class, right? So this would get us the class HTML attribute on the image tag that we just got. So if we print image class instead of the image element and clear out our console and click on the next button, we see a bunch of strings which only have the classes printed to the console. So now we need to find which one of these contains the active image string inside of it. And the way to do that is by I guess we could do it by using the index of function. So index of, spelled like this, allows you to do very easily searches within both strings and arrays, and it returns the first index where what you're searching for was found, or -1 if the thing you're searching for was not found. So let's write the code and it's going to become more obvious. So we'll say var index in string, or like position in string, equals image class dot index of, we're looking for active image, right? Like we want to find which one of these HTML elements has the active image class attached to it. Right, so if we print the position in string, console log active image position in the class is, and then position in string. Right, I'm going to clear the console again and click on the button. So we see the first one, the class is carousel image, active image position in the class is -1. So the index of returns -1 if it can't find anything. Blah, 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 we have some -1, and then we we finally have the image which has the class active image, and we're being told that their position in the class is 15, and it's 15 because it's just the position in the string where the A is found at, right? So C is 0, A is 1, R is 2, and so on and so on and so on. So there's like 14 other characters before it. But we only need to know, like, if this value is larger than 0, that means our active image was found in the class, so we already have our index for the currently active image. So we can just say if position in string is larger than or equal to 0, then we just say current active image index equals to index, right, which is where we're at with our for loop. All right, cool. So this is a huge step. If we have our current image index, we can detect the previous one and the next one without much trouble, and then we can move the classes around. I'm going to comment out these console logs for now, and we can say the following. We can get the previous index and we can get the next index. So let's say var previous image index equals current active image index -1. If the current active image index is 0, right, like if we're on the first image in the carousel, the previous image should be the last image that we wrote, right? So we can just say if previous image index is lower than 0, right? So we would get a -1 if we're on the first image. We can just say previous image index equals all images dot length -1. So that's the last element. Let's do the same for the next image. Next image index equals current active image index +1. And if the next image index is greater than or equal to all images dot length, right? So if our current image is the last one, then the next image should be image number 0, right? The first one. And we say next image index equals 0. All right, cool. So we are almost there, right? What we want to do when the user clicks next is that we want the next image to become the current one will become the new previous one, and then there's going to be a new one that becomes the next one. Right, so we have the one that's like 2 in the future from now, that's going to be the new next one. So let's create a variable for that as well. Let's call it var new next image index, which is going to be next image index +1, right? So 2 to the right from the current active one. And let's do the same thing of if we're over the length. So if the new next image index is bigger than the length, the new next image index is actually going to be 0, right? So if the current one is the second to last one, the next one is the last one, and the new next is going to be the first one. Okay, and I think that should be it for the indices. So let's write in the comments what needs to happen. So we need new next image next image becomes new next image. Current image becomes next image. Previous image becomes current image. Right? I think that's what we need to do. And when I say becomes, I really mean transitioning the classes, right? Like not having previous image anymore on the old previous image, and like moving the next image, active image, and previous image classes between our images. So let's do that. Let's start actually backwards. Let's start from the previous image, which becomes current image. In order to do that, we should first remove the previous image class from the current previous. So we can say all images of previous image index set attribute class. Let me use the double quotes. In JavaScript, you can use single or double quotes kind of interchangeably. And then the class we want to give it is simply carousel image, right? We want to remove it, the previous image class. So we'll just say carousel image. Okay, and then the current one will become the previous one, right? So what's it called? Current active image index set attribute class, and then we have carousel image and previous image. Yes. The next one, next image index, becomes the current one. So we do set attribute for class, carousel image, and what did we call it? Active image. And the next one becomes the next one. Now this is a little bit confusing. New next image index, set attribute class, carousel image, next image. Oh my god, this was a lot. Okay, so now if we test it, I'm like afraid to test it. I feel like it's not going to work, but we will see. If we click on the right button, we should see images moving. Oh my god, it's working. That's absolutely crazy. Let's do it in a new window, so we can actually see what's happening. We need to, I see, we need to deal with the height, maybe give it like a maximum height property. Right, so they are moving in the sequence that we have them in. Okay, great. So now, before we even get to implementing the previous one, let's fix this up a little bit. Let's fix the heights. Let's make them be at most as tall as the container, and then hide the previous one and the next one, and also make them animate like we talked about. So in order to fix the heights, I'm gonna go into CSS, and I think I'm just going to kind of eyeball this and try to figure out how to fix it. So instead of height auto, and I'm just going to try doing a max height of 100%. I'm not sure what this is going to do. I see, so this is going to stretch the image, which we definitely don't like. Okay, let me Google something real quick. CSS image cover, because that's what we want. I think we even like talked about it in the image tutorial, but I always forget how to use it. Oh, there we go. Okay, so object fits. Great. So if we say height 100%, and then object fit cover. Yes, that's it. Right, so if we say height 100% and then object fit cover is going to zoom in on the image while keeping the aspect ratio in order to fill the container, right? So as we move on to the next ones, we see just like a zoom in on the center of the image for each one of them. Oh, this is crazy. We like have a working carousel. Okay, and the other object fit option that might be actually more interesting for us is contain, if we want the user to see the full image, in which case we are going to see some background as well, right? Okay, so maybe we'll keep it at contain. And let's make them animate. And once we make them animate, we're gonna implement the previous button, and then we are done. All right, let's see. So for the animation, I think it should be really easy. I think if we just apply a transition, right, like we're doing a transition for the opacity on the buttons, if we apply a transition on the transform for the images, my feeling says that they would animate, but we will find out. So I'll say transition, transform, let's say 1 second. A different easing function than linear is in out. Maybe Google it, see what's up with easing functions. I'm not going to go into them right now, but they have kind of a different way of movement that mimics a little bit better like natural movements, if that makes any sense. Let's see. Ooh, what a chaos. Okay, so this is almost working. Like we see the next image coming in. However, the current image, oh no, I see. Okay, so the next one, the current one and the next one are moving fine. However, the previous one is coming back into the viewport, right? So the previous one is coming back at us, which we definitely don't want. Okay, so let's fix that. How do we fix that? Oh, interesting. So it's actually not the previous one, it's the new next one, which was in the center initially, right? Because it doesn't have any kind of transform applied to it. And then suddenly its position moves over to the right. So we should find a way to kind of remove the movement transition from the center one, or or make it appear only after it has transitioned to the new position. All right, let's see here. Right, so it's the new next that is glitching out. That's making our code not work. Okay, I'm going to try something that's kind of a dirty solution, but let's see if that works. So before I set the attribute to next image, which will trigger its transform to change, right? Like it used to not have anything, so it had a translate x of 0. It becomes translate x 100% over an animation, but then its opacity becomes 1 before it animates, right? Which is why we have a problem with it. I'm going to disable its transition, right? Just for the next image. I'll disable its transition from JavaScript, wait for it to move to the new position, and then re-enable its transition for afterwards. So let's see. I'll say all images for new next image index dot style for transition oops equals none. Right, so we see the problem not happening anymore. However, after we scroll for a while, we don't have transitions because we've disabled transitions on every one of the images. Right, so we disable its transition, we set the attributes of next image which moves it to the new place, and then we should re-enable its transition. Right, so after that, and we'll see if this works, we set its transition back to whatever it was in CSS, which is transform 1 second is in out. All right, so let's see how that works. Okay, so the bug is still happening, and I think the bug is still happening because this set attributes actually doesn't execute synchronously, right? Like I think HTML sets this afterwards. Yeah, after we set its transition back to the original. So what I'm going to do as a temporary solution, please try to avoid this as much as you can. It's just a temporary fix for now. I'm going to set a timeout for maybe 100 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds, right? Allow HTML the time to change the position of the element, and after that only bring back its transition. So I'm going to say set timeout. You can also, yeah, set timeout. Let's say bring back. No, I'm just going to create an inline function, and I'm going to explain in a second. And let's say like 350 milliseconds. Before, when we use set timeout, we created a function kind of up here, right? In the same way that we make one for buttons, right? Like we have on previous button click, and then we have a function that deals with that. Turns out you can also use inline functions in JavaScript. Inline function really means that instead of having to go up and declare like a global function, you can write it inside of the current code you're in. That's exactly what's happening with the window.addEventListener, right? Like in case you're wondering, why is there a function here as opposed to us creating a new one? It's really the same thing. It's more a matter of like how you want to organize your code. If you have a lot of inline functions, this like code can become really messy really quickly. But in our case, all we need to do is this, right? So it's not worth creating a new function. The other useful thing for inline functions is that you have access to all of the variables inside of your current context. If I were to create a new function, the new function wouldn't know who all images is, for example, right? So let's see what happens now. right? So we still see it being a little bit weird because we are showing the edges. However, the moment we hide them, where are you? Overflow hidden. And let's go onto our actual page. We have a perfectly smooth and functional image carousel. Of course, you can change the background color. You can style it however you want. Maybe right, like maybe let's just remove the background color from the images container and just keep the large container with one. Or maybe we can also remove the background color from the large container. Yeah, but that's kind of it. Those are the basics of building a carousel using JavaScript. To reiterate, like recap quickly what we've done, we first built the HTML, right? By having a container for the entire carousel, having a container for the images themselves, and then for the two navigation arrows. Inside of the container for the images, we just have image image tags, right? And these could be this could be divs, they could be h1s, they could be whatever you want them to be. And we're using the carousel image class and then the active image, previous image, and next image. And then from JavaScript, we are really just moving the active image, previous image, and next image tags, classes from one tag to another in order to account for the logic of moving between different images. I said I would implement the previous button as well. I think I'm going to leave that as an exercise for you. It's really similar to what we're doing on next button click. It's just that the order is different, right? Like instead of thinking about the next and the next, you'd think about the previous and the previous. Other than that, it's literally all the same, and it's code that you can just copy and paste. I think I'm gonna stop here. This has been a quite long tutorial, but feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and thank you for watching.